couple of caveats. I'm Barney Davis. I'll be your first and third. Roger Brown will be following me. Both Roger and I realized that each of our talks are approximately an hour and a half in length, and so we limited each other to 20 minutes each, so there'd be plenty of time for questions and answers afterward. That being said, if you're going to do an hour and a half talk in 20 minutes, I have hypercaffeinated. I hope you have as well. This is going to be very quick, okay? This is not a reflective talk. I mentioned to somebody this morning, this is actually a better conversation than a presentation. But anyway, we'll have time to fill in the blanks afterwards, hopefully. Caveats, this is a shameless recruiting talk. I'm a psychiatrist, Roger's a psychiatrist. We've been doing that for our adult lifetimes. We are both involved in missions from different perspectives, and that's why we're giving the talk. And what we need are some other folks to join us. Psychiatrists, yes, but also the other mental health professionals. And we'll be at a meeting somewhere, and we'll see a psychiatrist drop by, and he says, you know, I love the Lord, and I like psychiatry, but there's just nothing you can do in missions. And in fact, the GHO, the short-term missions crowd of CMDA, for the longest time, when it came down to all, if you're an optometrist, we got these, if you're an ophthalmologist, etc. When it got to mental health, it said, unfortunately, due to the nature of the service, there is no opportunity for short-term or intermediate care, which we've got them to where they're changing that. But we're here to put the word out. So if you are a mental health interested person, that's great. We'd like to see more of you and talk to you. And if you're not, if you would please talk to your psychiatrist, okay, or your counselor, and say there's some ways you can get involved in mission work, okay? Basically what this is about, we're presenting two different perspectives of how to do on-field mission care. See if I can talk to myself here. There's an on-site fixed location version, and Dr. Brown Roger will be talking about that for the second portion of this. As advertised, fixed location, beautiful building, multiple specialties, counseling, psychology, others that will be in that building. These are usually located in areas where there is a significant number of missionaries, or it's easy access by missionaries, okay? So for instance, Roger will show you Tumaini Clinic in Nairobi, which he started, 25, 27 years ago. In Chiang Mai, Thailand, there's the Well, there's Cornerstone. There's a couple other places out there that are fixed location people go to. There's a wonderful component for that. On the other side, or A side, is what I'm going to be talking about, which would be considered itinerant care, which is not a fixed location. We tend to go to people at different locations multiple times, following up virtually, etc. We both feel that both models are necessary, both feel both models work. What this was about, what we did, we took about a 1 year period of time in the recent past, and we went to our respective closets and we both pulled out, how many people did we see in that period of time? What were the complaints? These are missionaries. Again, previous talks were talking about psychiatry to indigenous populations. We're talking about member care, psychiatry, counseling services rendered to missionaries. What were their complaints? What do they have issues with? What are their problems? How many do we see? What do we do about it? How do we respond? And if possible, what were their outcome issues? How did that come out? Okay, we've got the basics. So this is a comparison. Okay, I'm going to do the itinerant plus virtual member care, 1 year experience, 1 year psychiatrist. Now I work in affiliation with a group called GRC, that stands for Godspeed Resources Connection, as I recall. They are a member care organization that's based in South Carolina. Webpage and stuff will be available later. And they do member care. Now on site, they can do debriefings. They have a staff on site that can do counseling if you want to come to them and you're in the U.S. But the majority of our work is done on field or by virtual connection. This is our staff, and we have full-time licensed professional counselors, LCSWs, PhD psychologists, part-time, again, psychologists, PhDs, LMFTs, and a bunch of LPCs. We have 3 psychiatrists working with GRC. I'm one of those. I'm full-time. We have Dr. Joe Martirano, that's J.O., that's a she. She's magnificent. She's full-time available. And we have Brandon Kilgore, who's recently joined us. He's teaching at the medical school in South Carolina and then also does some part-time with us as well. We have on site in Columbia, we have a debrief facilitator. and a spiritual director. I don't live there. I live in Phoenix, so not all of our available resources are on site in Columbia. Okay. My setting, my full-time work at this point is memory care. Again, everybody else gave a bit of a bio. I'm too old to do that. We only have a limited amount of time. But born right after the earth cooled into a Christian home in Texas without benefit of salvation. I'll be 75 in December. I got saved about 30 years ago. And the rest is history. I was going to sail around the world. I was trying to get rich and famous, and then I got saved, and all the wheels fell off. And so this is what now look at me. Here I am. But all I do is memory care, and grateful for that. Most of what I do is external, go to the field. 3 to 6 months out of the year, I'm somewhere else, sometimes more, sometimes less. And then we follow up with virtual telecommunication. The 1 year period of time that we picked, there were 5 trips, a couple to Indonesia, a couple to Kenya, and 1 to Thailand. Now the last 2, the Kenya trip and certainly the 1 to Thailand was, by the way, the CMDE conference, if you're familiar with that. So more than half of these people that I saw were medical missionaries. Our GRC doesn't limit to that, but it just so happened that these locations, some of the Kenya and the Thailand, were almost fully medical missionaries. By the way, thank you for taking notes. You're welcome to do that. I'm going to talk fast. We are going to make both of our presentations available, either downloadable or whatever, and we'll let you know how to do that later. We follow up by virtual counseling. I would say that, and we'll make the point later, as an itinerant person, it is so much better if I can initiate an assessment on field, on site, because I'm in the same situation, the person's experiencing their stuff. I get to see what they feel, what they're dealing with, whether it's heat or bugs or bullets, whatever it might be. But sometimes we're asked to do an emergency evaluation in an area where we can't get to or we can't get there in time. And so we'll start from scratch, do a complete assessment by video. Psychiatry is nice that way, that most of us can do most of what we do over a computer screen. My setting, now during that 1 year period of time, I also worked at Too Many Clinic. I had visited there many times. It was a blessing. I've been honored and privileged to work there sometimes for a month or 2 at a pop. So I did not include the number of people I saw there in my numbers, because that would have been his numbers, okay? You get it in terms of the residential care. I only see kids if I have to, and at great expense. You have to feed me and whatever. I just don't do well. I don't have child and adolescent training other than that which I got during initial training. So almost all the kids that I saw, and most of them were adolescents, were for ADD evaluations or assessments. Others a couple, but our numbers will be different because Rogers has child and adolescent training, and they're set up to do a lot more than that. Total time with any one unit, and I'll describe that in a minute. It's about, it could vary from one visit, which for me it's about 60 to 90 minutes to do a complete assessment, up to 30 hours, maybe either on-field intensive, if that's available and possible, or partial intensive there, follow up with regular video counseling or in follow-up afterwards. Okay. So here's my 1 year service. During that period of time, I saw 70 missionary units. That could be individuals, could be couples, it could be an entire family and pieces thereof. Many had more than one diagnosis. We'll make that point multiple times. So if you're in medicine, you kind of know this, and psychiatry is particularly true. Almost never is the chief complaint the real problem, because most people don't really know what their real problems are. They have I'm feeling this bad, but I don't always know why. So chief complaint is not always the thing. You wind up with multiples. We'll talk more about that. The numbers specifically for this 1 year period of time of the 70, I saw 19 in Thailand. All of those would have been medical missionary units. 26 on field in Indonesia. Those were non-medical, just missionary units, families. 19 on field in Kenya, and about half of those were medical missionary units. And I did it separately during that 1 year period of time. 6 of those, well, I don't want to do it this way, but we got no choice. Initial full evaluations by video, other countries, for the countries only. And sometimes when we are going into an area to meet with a particular group, there will have been a catastrophe, a geopolitical issue, a trauma issue, floods, earthquakes, shootings, whatever. And there's kind of a global group PTSD reaction going on. And so we will come in and give a talk to everybody at that point about those. And so that's also kind of part of what we can do on the scene. Now, Roger and I got together on this. I'm a lumper, he's more of a splitter, and he's way more scientific and much more accurate. If we try to do the DSM-5, if you don't know what that is, that's that thick book in psychiatry that has the list of all the diagnoses we make. Now, please, again, caveat, I'm a board-certified psychiatrist, which means I have expertise in the only medical specialty in the world that cannot prove any diagnosis it makes, at least at this point. So these are all subjectively determined. When I was a little bitty doctor, it was the DSM-2, and then it was the DSM-3, and the DSM-4, and the DSM-4TR, and now it's the DSM-5. And so we could use that, except we got no time to do that. So we made up our own categories, somewhat clustered, but here's what that would look like so you'll get an idea. We lumped all the affective disorders under one. The mood, dysthymia, bipolar, adjustment disorder, depressed mood, seasonal affective disorder. So all that spectrum that things present as depression, we put that in there. Under anxiety disorder, we lumped everything. DSM-5 separates out OCD, obsessive compulsive disorders, its own separate category. We put everything in the same bag, okay, just for this purpose. Now, you will notice there will be a discrepancy between my numbers and Roger's numbers, particularly in the anxiety category, and that is simply a matter of how we both chose to see the same issues. My tendency was to call it what I found to be the underlying cause as opposed to the presenting situation. But we're not seeing different patients, it is different nomenclature. Trauma, PTSD, everything that you can imagine that would include that, whether global or individual or old or complex or whatever we threw in that bag. Relational, kind of made that one up, but it would have what you would think in it. Intrafamily issues, husband, wife, child, team members, individual issues having to do with relational stress. This was the big bag, transition/agency/cross-cultural adaptation. This is everything from just the phenomenon of going into a different culture and getting used to being there, food, temperature, accessibility, whatever, new relationships, language, and also the leavings, because there's as much stress sometimes in the leavings. This includes what I call home assignment disease. Home ministry assignment can be, those of you who have to raise support know that sometimes the hardest work you're going to do all year is going back and doing the circuit of visiting 100 churches and sleeping in the backs of everybody's place, eating the same fried chicken in every church. I don't understand how they do that. Or it's a casserole sometimes, but I think they pass it on ahead. Be pretty exhausting. So everything that's that, including, and we could have put this under relational, but it was more kind of an organizational thing, a bad fit. And throughout the years I've seen where good and godly agency brings on, by random Brownian motion, I guess, a good and godly missionary, and their fit in terms of their focus, their desires, their overall theological stance, whatever, is just rotten. And they wind up trying to fit square pegs into round holes, and it just doesn't work very well. And often the problem is you think, well, don't you know that up front? Well, you should. But part of our issue, part of our concern is that most member care issues are reactive. Most of what we see is after the fact. Could have been dealt with, could have been improved or avoided if we'd had earlier contact. But most mission agencies, they're learning because the recidivism rate is so, the retention rate is so bad right now. But anyway, what else? We put grief in there, and that's any way you can get sad, we put it in there. Personal loss, mass traumas, issues. This is particularly true for medical missionaries, that compassion fatigue thing. I know guys that have worked 12, 14 hours in an operating room, do miraculous work, save a bunch of people, and then on their way home, they're walking past the 15 people they couldn't see, some of whom will die before they get back. And so they don't think of the ones that they saved, they think of the ones they didn't have a chance to talk to. So just being in situations of great need. Medical, that from a psychiatric standpoint, are medications indicated in this situation? Are they available? How can we do that? And also an assessment of just a general medical status, because again, in psychiatry, I can remember doing absolutely marvelous work. God, it was good, with a lady in Haiti. No, she was in Colombia, terribly depressed, and she couldn't have had better memory care. Her depression got pretty much better. It got a whole lot better once we found her TSH was about 75. She actually had hypothyroidism, and I just missed that because I didn't get the right studies. So we try to make sure that there's been adequate medical assessment to I've got a couple in a different part of the world, that husband and wife who both came down with profound OCD within 3 months of each other. And we traced it back to methylene filarium. They started it, and they had outcomes which are not surprising with that drug. What else do we do? ADHD, self-explanatory, and then the wastebasket term other. We don't see much psychosis. Being on mission service, just getting to the point where you're there, rules out most of the early onset psychoses as far as chronic schizophrenia, et cetera. We will, on the other hand, see new onset, first onset bipolar, manic typically, and or first onset, just first onset of psychotic behaviors. We had one of those this past year in a 16-year-old. Substance abuse, yes. Even in the missionary population, yes. Behavioral addictions, yes, in the missionary population. So if we don't ask and don't pursue, we don't know. So the presenting complaint is, again, not the real problem most of the time, and I mentioned already that anxiety was a frequent presenting complaint, and then sometimes, depending on how we parse it out, we would claim that as the diagnosis or cover. Let me give you a sample case study. I think I can do this fairly quickly. I have permission from the people. In fact, they were enthusiastically saying, please. I told them what we're trying to do, and they said, oh, please. No names, no locations. Some of you may have known them, though. If you recognize any of this, between you and God, okay? Husband, wife, and now 3 children. They had spent about 4 years in preparation to get to where they were going, and they were going to a village in a remote area. The first 3 or 4 years were learning the base language, the national language, and they were going to go then into the village. And they were supposed to, back up here, they were supposed to be there a couple of years to learn the language, get it acclimated, and then from that point forward, gospel spread, church planting, etc. They absolutely loved it. They both say that when they were in the village, it was the happiest they'd ever been in their lives. They felt fulfilled. They felt like they were where they were supposed to be. The problem is, after a couple of years, though, the agency said, sorry, sir, you have not learned the language sufficiently. Cut-off point, y'all are having to come out. At the time, nobody recognized he had probably the worst case of adult ADD I've ever seen in a human being, up to the point of some learning disabilities. No wonder he was having trouble. Now, he had had that most of his life. He had an IQ of about 160. And like most intelligent people who have entertaining of ADD, you find mastery techniques. You find ways around it. And up to that point, he had been in situations where he could get around it and learning other things. This was out in the middle of nowhere, and his wife learning the language. It just didn't work. So they had to pull out of the place that they most wanted to be. Of course, now you got issues of grief and failure and all those things. She was doing great, by the way. She mastered the language in about a year. So whatever intradynamics that might bring. So they pick them up in a helicopter to take them out. 2 of them and the kids. On the way out, the restraining strap on the door of the helicopter broke. Her seatbelt was not well fastened, and she almost fell out. So she grabs with one hand the door to hold herself up with her other arm. She is preventing her children from falling out after her. The terrain was such they could not land, so this went on for about 15 minutes with her precariously perched. You can imagine. So when they land and subsequent, the whole PTSD issues out of that alone. Skip the emotions about having to leave. Just the near-death experience and all of that was significant and required a separate situation. By the way, I didn't neglect to mention the chief complaint when this person saw me was, they tell me I have ADD and somebody started me on medicines, am I on the right amount? That was all I knew about them when they came in the door, and that was the husband. All the rest of the stuff comes out in taking your history. When they got back, they were reassigned to administrative work in their general field, pretty much given the job of member care, although they had no clinical experience. They happened to be intuitively very good at it, but they weren't trained to do it, no experience. And there was a bunch of natural disasters and some other things that happened that they had to go and help other people deal with their trauma, and they had never themselves been debriefed about any of the stuff we just talked about. So they were feeling a little bit used and abused by their agency. They still love their agency, they still like the people in it, but they felt like, wait, nobody's getting what we're doing. They're asking us to do what we wished we had had. They adopted a third culture child somewhere in that area. There were significant attachment issues for the first 6 months. They transacted it beautifully. things are well now, but that 6 months, basically, it was the mother and the daughter who were a dyad and pretty much not available to anybody else in the family. So there was internal communicational disruptions. They did it well, but it was traumatic in its own right. And what else? And the wife herself had a significant history of remote complex trauma going back to childhood, had never really had a chance to work on this with anybody, and although far away, didn't notice much. Now on HMA, they're back living in the same area around some of the same participants and protagonists. So that was the picture of somebody who said, can you adjust my ADHD medications? That is not uncommon, that we will turn that kind of stuff up, stuff that you can deal with on the spot, something that you're going to have to figure out a way to deal with later, what can you do where you are, what do you have to bring back, etc. So that's the challenge and the fun of this whole thing. Here's my numbers by the diagnostic categories that I described. Mood disorder, you can read like I can read. I'm not going to go down all this. I'll rank them here in a second. Here's the rank order. So these are the thing that, in my one-year experience, given the limitations of what I was able to do, the number one complaint, if we're going to name it, and again, many people have multiple of these, multiple diagnoses, but the number one issue was that transition issue, cultural stress, agency fit. Okay, just being comfortable in the circumstances that they were in and adjusting to and dealing with, whether it's the compassion fatigue, intra-team issues, whatever. Mood disorders, we heard yesterday from the Karens about how mood disorders, I think y'all said number 3 in the world in terms of depression, in terms of most likely causes, and soon to be number 2. Certainly the symptoms of depression, any of those diagnostic categories, that was number 2. Relational issues, husband-wife, parent-child, intra-team, all those things, okay? Those were the top 3. And then the rest of them come up. The trauma, PTSD was there, no question. Grief, ADHD, the medical, and again, you'll see probably Roger's numbers would rank anxiety a lot higher. Almost everybody I saw had anxiety, so probably could have moved this up. But that's, by the way, anecdotal. I was in private practice for a long time before I got saved and got involved in this. I see about 3 times the amount of OCD in my mission population than I ever saw. I don't know why, but maybe it's just our Christian stuff. You know, it was easier when I was a pagan seeing pagans because those people just got to feel bad. Now I work with Christians who get to feel bad and they get to feel guilty about feeling bad. So it complicates the situations. A lot of the Catholics actually have a name for it. It's called scrupulosity. There's a category under OCD of religious themed obsessions. Am I saved? Am I good enough? Et cetera, et cetera. And we see that. I had one other that was primarily a first onset psychosis. There was a family that was in a village and they knew that we were going to be nearby, so they helicoptered out to bring their adolescent son. They said they were concerned because he wasn't eating well and didn't seem to be faring as well as they had hoped. Went in to talk with him, and he was completely psychotic, actively hallucinating, and completely delusional. And so was having a first onset psychosis. Now that did require bringing them out, but they're back. They're doing fine. So. Medication that we use, basically mood disorder and anxiety issues, ADHD. About 30% of the people I saw, we made a decision or activated or continued medication issues. So the part of me that's a medical psychiatrist gets to play some. Majority were continued of these were continued on previously instituted medications. Sometimes I just need a refill. Is my dose right? I'm having these side effects. What are the alternatives? Only had one major complication, nobody's fault. It had to do with availability of medication, and I had missed the fact. I thought somebody was on their bupropion 450 milligrams daily, as they had been, with a new supply coming in. Unbeknownst to me, they looked like they were going to run out, so they decided to decrease their dose down to 150 milligrams regularly for about 2 or 3 weeks. When they got to 450 and immediately went to it, had a grand mal seizure. They did fine afterwards. We had to go through the whole workup, of course. Majority of these that we have given are antidepressants, SSRIs, and ADHD meds. Again, widely varying depending where you are, what their availability might be. Now, I'm glad I can say this. Now, I take a full spiritual history on everybody I see. I had a quirk in my training. I wound up getting training in biblical counseling as well. And I am sadly, I'm an integrationist. That's a bad word on either side. But I take a spiritual history because we always want to say at some point in this, maybe, why is a good God who only gives good gifts to his kids, why is he allowing this in your life right now? What's he trying to tell us about him and about you? And my favorite verse, Genesis 50:20, that which was intended for evil looks like it was, God would use for good, that many will be saved. How is God using the trauma, the discomfort, the problem we're dealing with here? Yes, we're going to work through it, but how is he going to use that to prepare you for what he has next, whether it's where you are or the next thing? So we do try to do that with everybody. No firm numbers on how much of that I did in biblical counseling. I can do both. Kind of mixed. We do, in our organization, we do follow up saying, kind of quality control. How did it work? Would you ever want to see Barney again? What did we do right? What did we do wrong? And this was anecdotally the most commented on. Thank you for providing what we needed, but you did so in connection with where God was and what the spiritual factors were. So there is a place for that. Okay? Outcomes, primary goal. Right now, the retention rate in mission work across the board is around between 25 and 50%. Rick Allen says that for medicine, they were to the point where 25% of the people they were sending out were having premature return. You do that long enough, you lose a field, you lose people. So depending on where it is and how you track it, 50% is quoted these days, 45 to 50% have premature return. Sometimes for reasons over which nobody's got any control. Most of these we think are preventable. So whatever we're doing is hopefully to keep people on the field. 2 units had to return to the passport country for further care that we just couldn't do on the field. They're not back yet. I didn't count in there, by the way, the one that was the first onset psychosis, that was in there, but they are back. Okay. 2 units left the original field because mostly conflict with agency or circumstance. They either changed agency or went somewhere else, and they're back on the field. They're fully functioning. It's just a different environment. One of them was brought home because they closed the field. They're upset, they're depressed, they're anxious, but they're grieving. But that's unavoidable. And 2, these are the saddest for us, is when 2 people leave the field completely. Just so tired out, so worn out, so burned out, so disappointed, they just say, never again, and they leave. And we've seen some marvelous missionaries just reach that point. And you don't want to get there. You just don't want to lose these good people. So, summary thoughts for me. On-field initial contact, I said, is much better rather than starting virtually. Psychiatric treatment from medication standpoint is more difficult because of accessibility of both availability of medicines and whether they're clones or not. We have to worry about that. Somebody asked in an earlier talk about confidentiality. That is totally unique. I was not used to, in my private practice, seeing somebody for their deepest issues in the morning and having dinner with them at night. In itinerant psychiatry, it is not uncommon for me to hit a field which there's nobody there but missionaries, so I'll be working with them at the deepest levels of their need and history and upset. And that afternoon or evening, I'm having dinner with them and reading a bedtime story to their kids. So deal with it because that's what it's like. And if you're the only other white guy in an entire room full of, a whole place, except for the missionaries, and you want to go talk to somebody, they know why you're there, Bill saying Barney. Well, yeah, he's saying Barney. I know he is because he's over there in my office right there. Do you want to go? So I don't know what to do about that. God has protected us in that greatly, and we it's a God thing. Majority of treatment is counseling based as opposed to medication. The address of the spiritual component is highly valued. Restrictions on follow-up, that's part of our problem. I can see you anywhere in the world, but if you come back to the U.S. and want to follow up further, if you live in Idaho, I can see you, I can talk a little bit, I can maybe refill meds, but I can't do regular care because I'm not licensed in Idaho. So once you're back in the States, it becomes difficult sometimes to find ongoing care available that works in that location. In spite of everything, this is the most fun I've ever had in my life. It's the most challenging group of people. Missionaries are all crazy. It's great. Well, you stop and think, you got to be a little crazy to get where you are. Come on. So it's the most rewarding group of people I've ever met with. And yes, the question is there a place for psychiatry in the mission field? And the answer is yes. That's me, and we can check back later on it. I'm going to get Roger up here. So let me bring his, we'll have time for questions.
Yeah, it's working? Okay, thank you so much. I must bring up my family. They've been with me, certainly my wife the whole time, but also our 2 lovely daughters, and then we've added a couple son-in-laws. One who is a MK, grew up in South Africa, and the other grew up in Cameroon, and so it's delight. Africa will continue to be living on in our lives as a family here. So I think Barney has clearly stated already in regards to the perspective of itinerant versus kind of more of a clinic-based. And I agree totally with what he has been talking about, and I will just try to piggyback on much of what he's already established as foundation. But there's also, as a clinic base, there's some unique dimensions, but there are also some huge overlaps as well. So in looking at what we do, and so I'm using the example of Tumaini Counseling Center, which is a center in Nairobi, Kenya, where we recognize that mental health and spiritual services to missionaries are incredibly important. And back in 1981, AIM, African Land Mission, and Wycliffe Bible Translators recognized the need to have a place for their counseling services, and we began to work together through this ministry or location of Tumaini Counseling Center. And it started out as a sharing of office space, and then it's turned into where it's a location where mission organizations are able to base their counseling ministry. So we've had mission counselors from a number of organizations over the years. Our purpose is to increase the fruitfulness of disciple makers throughout by enhancing missionary resilience, offering restorative and preventative care services, and pastoral care services. And we see that missionary member care is an honorable stewardship of the missionary call, with the utilizing our specialized training to help them in regards to sustaining their ministry and working through sometimes the traumatic experiences that they go through in their ministry. So when we talk about where, just briefly, most of you are aware, but just this map of Africa, recognizing that Africa is a huge continent, and where we can fit huge portions of the U.S., China, India, other countries in that. And as I'm with Africa in the mission, AIM is based, working throughout Central and Eastern Africa and Southern Africa, and much of the area in the north that we can't really talk about so much publicly, and has also recently added 3 countries in West Africa. But we're working with over 160 mission organizations that are working across nearly all of Africa. And Tumaini Counseling Center is very unique in the sense of it being one of the only locations where missionaries can go to when they go through traumatic or need more restorative type of care. So where also includes a specific building, and this is a purpose-built building built in 2002. Prior to that, we had rented office space. And it's a delightful, restorative climate. We have gardens. In addition, we added a second office in Kampala, Uganda. We have just one apartment of this apartment building where we've had 1 or 2 counselor space. The how of the Tumaini ministry. We see approximately 350 to 400 missionaries each year. Let me just catch up with my notes here for a second. Most of our work is done in our counseling offices. where people schedule appointments with us, but we also do itinerant work, and that we also travel to different fields for field conferences where we will provide workshops and then also provide counseling during a block of time. We also are involved in providing preventative services with like interpersonal skills workshops, marriage enrichment retreats, psychoeducational opportunities that arise. And then we also provide consultation services to mission organizations and the schools that missionary kids attend. You can see a host of things that we do. And this depends on our staffing. Our staffing levels vary over time, and depending on the expertise of the individuals that we have working and how many we have, we are much broader and in regards to our services when we have more staff. Other seasons of time with people going away on home assignment or retiring, we end up needing to contract, and we end up focusing more on the organizations that are providing the counselors for the ministry. Otherwise, if we have sufficient counselors, we're very broad in regards to supporting the like-minded mission organizations. Let me just speak briefly about my role. I would say that my role varies considerably over the years, depending again on who else is present. Sometimes I've been the only psychiatrist, and I do general psychiatry, a lot of general psychiatry and child psychiatry, and counseling. If there are other psychiatrists present, then I'm able to focus more specifically on the child psychiatry aspects. If there are a lot of men as counselors, I may not be doing any counseling. If I'm the only man, then it may be that I'm called upon to do more counseling. If there are other therapists that provide therapy for children, then I will back off and allow others to do that. If there aren't, then I am directed in that way. So being very much a generalist, but also being able to focus in, at times, seasons of time, where my areas of interest more lie. So I'm not going to spend a moment on the why. That's already been talked about this morning. But I want to note that many of the easy areas of outreach in Africa have already been reached. There is a growing church and ascending church in Africa. The places that remain, for the vast part, are hard to reach. Hard to reach environmentally. Hot places like in Sahara Africa, or politically unstable, or spiritually hard to get into, controlled access. And so there are also very hard places, not just to live, but also to raise a family, and challenges. And we all are bruised. The effects of the fall have impacted all of us in the world around us. And there is a significant need for being able to support workers in these difficult situations. As far as the who, I want to just highlight the who of our clinical staff. And we have had a delightful team of clinicians over the years. And it's varied from as few as 1 to as many as 10. And this is our present clinical staffing. We also have support staff that are based in other locations, like in UK, and I will be based in the US, moving into that role here in this next year. We make use of video conferencing, not just for with clients, but also for communicating with ourselves. And we meet 2 times a week for clinical staff discussions, which has been a very rich time as we are a multidiscipline, multinational team of counselors that we are able to discuss sometimes very, very complex situations and providing recommendations to organizations and individuals, and also working together as a team in regards to some of our clinical care. So it may be that 2 or 3 of us are involved in a family or a mission unit. One person, such as myself, might be providing the psychiatric evaluation, medication. Someone else might be doing some marital therapy. Someone else might be working with the children. So quite a selection. So I'm going to, as Barney did his roughly 100 clients, I've begun doing a review of my last cases that have been closed. And this is composed of 89 mission units, as he has described already, a mission unit being a family. Many have multiple diagnoses, and this has been made up of 69 children and 43 adults. One of the things about the picture, it's, if you took a picture of the clients that I saw, maybe in a different term, it would look completely different, a different composition because of not just who's coming through the door, but who else is available to provide the services and how much administrative role that I've had. But it still is, and it's representative of me at that point in time, and remembering that there are other clinicians that are doing other work as well. So, of these 89 missionary units, these are the countries that they were serving in. And as you can see, it's actually representative of North Africa. North Africa is there, you can't see it, but it is represented. East Africa, Central Africa, South Africa, even in West Africa. The nationalities of these 89 missionary units. And over the years, Tumaini has seen missionaries coming from about 25 countries from around the world, which is sometimes we don't think of or recognize how international missions is. Barney's already gone through the diagnostic criteria groupings that we use. I've just added a few things in blue where, because of the dimension of seeing children. So here, under the anxiety, I also saw children with social anxiety, separation anxiety, and specific phobias. Under the medical, I noted that with the medication-induced mood disorders, migraines, enuresis and caprices, sleep disturbances. Under relational, also children with social skills deficits. And then a whole nother category of developmental as a child psychiatrist. So where children may have oppositional behavior, autism spectrum disorder, learning disorders, attachment issues, sensory processing disorder, or communication disorders. Over the years, we've at times had psychologists that are available for doing psychoed testing. That's not always been possible. And we've made use of people sometimes in the community that have had some of those skills. But now, this is a slide that begins to compare what Barney saw with what I saw. And I broke out, so Barney's column is the first, and then I have The next column to the right of that is all of my clients, and then adults, and then children. Noting under mood disorders, I had a significant number, about half of them being children and half adult with mood disorders of the 50 listed there. Also noting under the anxiety for children, there's a significant number of children having anxiety diagnoses, and actually children with anxiety often have multiple anxiety disorders. I didn't see as many individuals with trauma during this block of time because others were doing trauma work. And then relational issues. I want to point out here under developmental that there were a significant number of MKs, missionary children, that had developmental issues. Learning disorders, autism spectrum disorder, attachment disorder. Missionaries, there are a number of missionaries that will adopt children, and a significant number of those children do have attachment issues that need to be worked through. And unfortunately, we don't really have significant resources for helping people on the field, families on the field. At seasons of time that we do, but presently we don't have individuals with attachment specialties. And then a huge number of children with ADHD, which is to be expected given that ADHD is the most common psychoneurodevelopmental disorder present in children. So, of course, missionary kids and adopted children would likely be showing up here. Then looking at the rank order, first starting look at the adults. Yes, for me, the number one was mood disorders. And the mood disorders were often mixed with other things going on. So I was including even those individuals that had an adjustment disorder, that they were struggling maybe with some relational issues, but they were indeed having difficulty with their mood. About half of those were major depression. I want to point out then with the children, ADHD was the most common diagnosis that I was dealing with. And then second was anxiety, and then developmental, and then fourth, mood disorders. So Barney was making use of medication in approximately 30% of his patients. I had about 54%. And again, this would vary over the years depending on if I was also doing therapy, but I was being sent more of the evaluations. An interesting point here that 10 of the children that I saw during this block of time were during the time of a course of treatment with me, were having self-harm or even suicidal thoughts at some point. And the age range of my clients, 3.5 to 81. And just as an aside, what a privilege. In some ways, having been there for 28 years, some of the MKs that I saw returned. And being able, and then they resumed, like maybe they had ADHD, or they went through a trauma debriefing later on. What a privilege to see that next generation and the investment that we put in supporting a family years ago that that were able to sustain their work, and then even the next generation coming back. And then the 81-year-old, what a delight to learn, even be learning myself from the clients that I saw. What a blessing they were to me as hearing about their stories, what the Lord was doing. So many things behind the scenes that I got to hear that other people did not necessarily get to know about. And then during this block of time, I also saw 20 for individual therapy. Just a couple of summary points also in regards to when I saw a unit, it was not unusual that I would end up starting with seeing a child and then maybe seeing another sibling, and also then doing an evaluation for one of the parents for either ADHD or depression, and then involving other clinicians to help in the treatment process. We do have a survey that we have our clients complete. And on that survey, one of the questions is, how much has Tumaini Counseling Center enabled you to help yourself deal with your difficulties? 83% said a great deal, and 16.7% to some extent. So that is the only, we have a lot of subjective and anecdotal reports about the effectiveness of what we've done, but this is the only actual measures that we've done so far. I wanted to say that being part of the clinical team has been not only a delight, but I would say essential for sustaining, as a mental health clinician, work in this type of setting. And we are very intentional in regards to our recruitment, our composition, to be multidisciplined, multicultural, and since our missionary population is international, we try to reflect, as the counselors of those ethnicities, if at all possible. So, thank you. So we do meet together with staffings and prayer for one another and support. And accountability, I think, is important too. Let me just comment on this in regards to some of the advantages, from my perspective, of an on-site versus strictly itinerant. Now, what I'd say, we are actually a mix of both, but I think one of the things from my perspective is that we're there enough of the time that we can develop relationships with the organizations, where it's taken, for some, many years before they would be willing to consider trusting us, our advice. And on the other hand, there's an advantage for somebody coming outside to, such as Barney, coming in with a fresh approach, but also, sometimes people don't make use of individuals that are part of your family, and some of that is kind of holding back, being able to know that the aspect of trust, of confidentiality, or you've already got a relationship with a person, a leader, so having somebody from the outside can be beneficial. When we have more than one organization present in the counseling office, we find, though, that individuals from our own organization at times will prefer meeting with somebody from another organization, just so that they can regards to dual relationships, but also just their confidence of making use of someone from the outside. So we're going to offer opportunity here for questions, and